Who's that? Commander Claw. Who's bad? Commander Claw. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Breaking Brews. I'm here to bring you 5 cards that I think you should consider adding while you're deck building Dionus Elvish Archdruid, which is a mono green legendary elf. If you are new to Magic, elf is one of the most popular tribes out here. And reason be because they do a lot of powerful things, such as tapping for mana and getting very powerful. Power boost, anthems, going wide. They could be 10-10s, 4-4s, 3-3s with trample, reach, all this craziness, and they're a bunch of elves. But I will make the screen larger so we can actually read what Dionys actually does. Then we can move on to the 5 cards. Let's go. On a 3-3 body, we got a legendary elf druid. Elves you control have whenever this creature becomes tapped. During your turn, untap it and put a +1/+1 counter on it. This ability triggers only once each turn. So, what is powerful about this card? It says elves you control. So, if you have 3 elves, including Dionys here, they all get this ability, which is whenever they become tapped. Okay, how are our ways to tap them? Uh, Elves usually tap for mana, or they tap for another ability, depending on the card. You can force tap creatures with artifacts. Um, and this is not to say that you don't run this in another, color scheme. There's black green elves out there. So there's multiple ways to tap a creature, either forcefully or non-forcefully. But let's get into the most important card on these 5 best pickups. Okay, so this Wincon is non-elf ball. I will summarize this card first before I read the card. Essentially, Agatha's Soul Cauldron steals and copies the abilities of creatures that have been exiled with it. And your creatures, such as your elves, are able to use those stolen creatures or exiled creatures' abilities. This is not a common way to win with elves, I promise you. So let me read the card. For 2 mana, Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a legendary artifact. You only can have one. You may spend mana as though mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. That's powerful enough. So, if this goes in a multicolor deck and you got something else with different abilities, any type of land will activate the ability. Then it says creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So with Dionys, every time one of your elves become tapped, you get a +1/+1 creature, only once per turn. This qualifies for Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Next up, tap. Exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Cool, you get to buff up your creature even more. But essentially, if a guy, gal has a powerful creature that you exile with, you get to copy that card's abilities. It's crazy. There's so many cards that have crazy abilities. Your elves are able to do that as long as they have +1/+1 counters. Take over the game with other creatures' abilities. Okay, next up we got Gyre Sage. For 2 mana, Elf Druid, 1/2 body, has the ability Evolve. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This creature's a 1/2. So when you put in a 2/2 or 2/3, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Gyre Sage. Okay, cool. Tap it. Add a green mana to your mana pool for each +1/+1 counter on Gyre Sage. So obviously, every time you tap with Gyre Sage, and only once per turn, you get to add a +1/+1 counter if Dionys is on the battlefield. So essentially, every time you tap mana, you get to put a +1/+1 counter. Then equal to its power is how much green mana you can add. It just adds up. Disgusting. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the Elvish Archdruid himself. It is a classic. It's a lord. For 3 mana, it's a 2/2. Other elf creatures you control get +1/+1. Tap it. Add green mana for each elf you control. You control 5 elves, including it. You're adding 6 mana. That's what elves do. Tap mana, add a lot of green mana, get bigger. Go. Okay, this is one of my favorites because I think it's kind of sneaky, and it also is a not a replacement, but a redundant spell similar to Hardened Scales. So Kamiya Whisper Hopes is for 3 mana, a 1/1 spirit. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many 1 +1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. So if Dionus is paired out here with it, and you put on 1 +1/+1 counter, you're putting on 2 +1/+1 counters on elves you control. Also, Kamiya Whispering Hopes says tap it. Add X mana of any one color where X is Kamiya Whisper Hopes power. Okay, cool. You can buff this up in the other way. It's not an elf, not a big deal. But if you want a replacement for Hardened Scales, this is a creature that can do it. Okay, so next up we have Fangs of Colonia. For 2 mana, it's a sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature that had a +1/+1 counter on it this way. Okay, for 2 mana, that's not bad, right? So you're pretty much putting on 2 +1/+1 counters. It gets better. For 6 mana, it has an overload cost. You may cast a spell for its overload cost. If you do, change target in its text to each. So each creature you control gets a +1/+1 counter. Then if you overload it, they get in 2 +1/+1 counters. That's not bad. You're just making this is really good for going wide. Um, nice +1/+1 synergy. Oh, well, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. Go ahead and let me know if you liked the video by subscribing. And if you want any more ideas, feel free to let me know. Share any cards at the very bottom here in this comment section. Elvish Archdruid, another classic elf creature. There's nothing else to say. Good luck deck building.